The airplane cabin hummed with the usual chatter of passengers settling into their seats. In the midst of it all sat Steven Seagal, dressed in his signature black jacket and sunglasses, exuding a calm, almost intimidating aura. Even in the confined space of the plane, there was an unmistakable presence about him. Every line of his body radiated quiet authority. Beside him, his wife sat gracefully, relaxed, scrolling through her phone, unaware that the peace around them was about to shatter. Most passengers gave no thought to the couple, assuming they were just another pair on a flight. But a few eyes lingered. Curiosity mingled with awe. Seagal was a legend in martial arts and Hollywood alike, but his demeanor here was subdued, almost humble. There was no pretense, only a steady, observant calm. Meanwhile, an arrogant passenger a few rows ahead seemed to be growing restless. His impatience was evident, tapping his foot, muttering complaints about the flight attendants, glaring at anyone who looked at him. He had that type of arrogance that made small annoyances escalate into major problems. Most passengers ignored him, focusing on their own business. But a few cast uneasy glances his way, sensing something could go wrong. Then, without warning, the passenger's agitation turned into action. He leaned toward Steven's wife, shoving past social boundaries with reckless disregard. It was a punch, swift, careless, and completely unprovoked. In an instant, the calm atmosphere of the cabin was shattered. Gasps echoed around the plane, heads turned, and phones were raised to capture the shocking moment. Steven's wife flinched, startled by the sudden attack, but thankfully she wasn't seriously hurt. Yet the tension in the air was palpable. Every passenger could feel it. This was no ordinary flight altercation. The arrogant passenger had made a grave mistake. And in that moment, everyone waited, watched, anticipated, because no one knew just how Steven Seagal would respond. His calm, measured eyes betrayed nothing, but those who had seen him in action knew that what happened next would leave a lasting impression. What Steven did next left everyone on the plane completely stunned. The airplane cabin, once filled with casual chatter and the soft hum of engines, had turned tense. Every passenger's attention was now focused on the commotion near Steven Seagal and his wife. What had started as a restless, arrogant passenger complaining about minor inconveniences had escalated into something far more serious. The passenger, clearly blinded by his own entitlement, suddenly reached across the aisle and struck Steven Seagal's wife. The punch was reckless and unprovoked, catching her off guard. Gasps and screams rippled through the cabin. Phones appeared in every direction as bystanders began recording the incident, their cameras capturing every stunned reaction. For a brief moment, time seemed to slow. Passengers froze in shock, unsure whether to intervene or wait. Some whispered in disbelief, "Did he just?" Others instinctively moved closer to shield themselves or the victim. The arrogance of the passenger had shattered the fragile calm of the flight. Seagal, seated beside his wife, reacted with the calm precision that only years of martial arts training could instill. He did not shout, nor did he panic. His eyes flickered briefly toward the attacker, analyzing his movements, calculating his intentions. The cabin was chaotic, but Seagal's presence immediately created a subtle shift in the energy around him. The arrogant passenger, expecting fear or confrontation from the shocked crowd, instead found himself facing a wall of silent, unwavering composure. Seagal's wife, although startled, instinctively moved closer to him. She understood the gravity of the moment. There was a tension in the air that went beyond the punch, a sense that this encounter could escalate or be diffused in the blink of an eye. If you were witnessing this, what would you do? Comment below with your reaction, and tell us which country and city you're watching from. Meanwhile, the passengers around them began murmuring. Some were too stunned to speak, while others whispered warnings to the arrogant passenger. "Back off, don't touch her." Yet he remained oblivious, emboldened by his own ignorance and unaware of who he was dealing with. Seagal didn't immediately move. Instead, he observed, letting the passenger reveal the extent of his recklessness. The attacker's arrogance was palpable. He puffed up, convinced that intimidation would give him control of the situation. But the moment his eyes met, Seagal's a subtle, silent warning passed between them. Seagal's calm intensity was disarming. It was a presence that demanded attention without a single word. Around them, the cabin was alive with tension. Some passengers whispered to each other, trying to identify the couple. Is that Steven Seagal? The realization began to spread quietly, almost imperceptibly. The arrogant passenger remained oblivious, still believing he could assert dominance. Seagal finally spoke, his voice low, calm, and controlled. "Step back. Respect is not optional." The words were simple, but they carried the weight of authority and experience. The cabin went quieter as passengers listened intently. Phones continued to record, but a sense of awe replaced the initial panic. The arrogant passenger, confused and rattled by the unexpected command, took a step back. Yet he wasn't ready to back down completely. His pride and ego demanded resistance, even in the face of someone far more capable than him. The tension was palpable. Every passenger watching, every eye on Seagal and the situation unfolding inches away. Seagal remained composed, never raising his voice, never losing control. His calmness contrasted sharply with the erratic energy of the passenger. The lesson was clear. Strength is not measured by aggression, but by control and presence. By now, the whispers among the passengers were growing louder. Some had fully recognized Seagal. Phones continued to record, capturing the precise moment when arrogance met disciplined composure. The flight attendants, hesitant at first, moved closer, ready to intervene, but aware that Seagal's presence alone commanded respect. The scene was a mix of fear, awe, and anticipation. Everyone on the plane knew something extraordinary was unfolding. The arrogant passenger had made a grave mistake, one that would become immediately obvious as the situation continued to evolve. Have you ever witnessed someone instantly regret their actions? Comment yes or no below and share your story. Seagal's strategy was clear: protect his wife, neutralize the situation, and let the attacker reveal his own foolishness. The tension in the cabin was a living thing, and every passenger could feel it in their bones. Cameras captured it, phones recorded it, and the world outside the plane was about to see it too. Even without movement, Seagal's calm presence was already teaching a lesson, one that only someone who underestimated him would fully understand in the coming moments. The arrogant passenger's confidence was beginning to waver just slightly, but enough for the audience to sense that the tide was about to turn. The cabin was charged with a nervous energy. Every passenger's eyes were fixed on Steven Seagal and the arrogant man who had just struck his wife. The initial shock had worn off, replaced by a tense anticipation. Everyone wondered, what would Seagal do next? Steven Seagal shifted slightly in his seat, his movements deliberate and precise. He didn't yell. He didn't lash out immediately. Instead, he assessed the situation. The passenger's posture, his aggression, his overconfidence, years of martial arts training, and countless real-world confrontations had taught him that patience and control were far more powerful than brute force. The arrogant passenger, still fuming, clenched his fists and leaned forward as if daring Seagal to react. Around him, the cabin was alive with whispers. Is that really Steven Seagal? And he's not moving. Why isn't he moving? The tension was almost tangible. Seagal's wife instinctively leaned closer, her hand brushing his arm. She trusted him completely. In her eyes, the calm determination in Seagal's expression spoke louder than words ever could. The attacker, however, remained oblivious. To him, the lack of immediate retaliation was weakness. Then Seagal made his move, but not in the way the passenger expected. He didn't lash out with anger or aggression. Instead, he subtly shifted his posture, creating a commanding presence. His voice, low and steady, carried clearly across the cabin. You have made a mistake. Step back. It was a calm warning, but it carried the weight of authority. The arrogant passenger froze for a split second, uncertainty creeping into his eyes. He hadn't anticipated being confronted with such composed control. Around them, passengers leaned forward in their seats, straining to see what would happen next. Phones raised higher, capturing every nuance. Seagal's calmness began to work like a magnet. The passenger's nervous energy focused on him, waiting for the inevitable resolution. The arrogant passenger's confidence wavered. His hands, once tight with aggression, began to shake slightly. He realized, too late, that he had underestimated the man sitting beside his wife. If you were on this flight, what would you do right now? Intervene, stay back, or try to calm him down? Comment below. Seagal's response was precise. In a series of subtle movements, He positioned himself between his wife and the passenger, ensuring her safety without using unnecessary force. Every action was controlled, deliberate, and non-lethal, demonstrating the skill and discipline that had made him a legend. The cabin held its breath. Every passenger was now acutely aware of the tension, their phones recording, their hearts racing. Some whispered among themselves, astonished at Seagal's calm authority. "He's not just an actor. He's trained for this," someone muttered. The arrogant passenger, sensing that he had lost control, tried to assert dominance again. He raised his voice, threatening, posturing. But it was too late. The dynamic had shifted. Seagal's presence alone had neutralized the threat. The passenger's aggression now looked foolish and uncoordinated in front of everyone watching. Seagal finally addressed the entire cabin, his voice firm but composed. "Violence will not solve anything. Respect others. This ends now." His words, simple yet commanding, resonated deeply. The passengers exhaled collectively, relief mixed with awe. By now, murmurs were spreading rapidly. "That's Steven Seagal. He just neutralized him without throwing a single punch." Cameras continued to roll. The arrogant passenger's arrogance was completely deflated. He was embarrassed, powerless, and now acutely aware of the mistake he had made. Seagal remained vigilant, scanning the cabin, ensuring the safety of his wife and the surrounding passengers. His calm control was the ultimate display of power and discipline. The lesson was clear. True strength is not in attacking recklessly, but in protecting, commanding respect, and maintaining composure under pressure. Have you ever faced someone who underestimated you? Share your story in the comments below. As the flight continued, the cabin slowly returned to a state of uneasy calm, but the story of the arrogant passenger who had struck Steven Seagal's wife would not be forgotten. Phones were still recording, passengers were still whispering, and the lesson was clear: respect matters, and arrogance can backfire in the most public ways possible. The cabin was still buzzing with tension, but the focus had shifted. All eyes were now on Steven Seagal and the arrogant passenger who had just made a catastrophic mistake. Passengers leaned forward in their seats, whispering in disbelief, while phones continued to record every second. What had started as a sudden reckless punch had transformed into a dramatic display of control and authority. Whispers began to spread, growing louder with each passing moment. "Is that Steven Seagal?" someone asked, voice trembling with awe. Another passenger nudged their neighbor, pointing discreetly. "Look at him. He's not even angry." But everyone is frozen. The realization was spreading. The man they had assumed to be just another passenger was, in fact, a legend. Someone who had dedicated his life to martial arts, discipline, and defending the vulnerable. The arrogant passenger remained frozen in the aisle, his confidence eroding rapidly. He had thought he could intimidate anyone. But now, confronted by Seagal's composed presence, he realized he had no idea who he was dealing with. Panic flickered across his face, and his earlier aggression began to crumble. For the first time, he felt vulnerable. Seagal's wife, seated beside him, had already regained her composure, though her hand still lightly rested on his arm. She knew that Seagal was in complete control. She glanced at the surrounding passengers, many of whom were still trying to process what they were witnessing. Some were recording, others whispering, and a few had their mouths open in awe. The entire cabin had become part of an unspoken audience, watching a confrontation transform into a lesson in discipline, respect, and calm authority. If you were witnessing this moment live, what would be going through your mind? Comment below with your reaction. Seagal's eyes briefly scanned the arrogant passenger, silently communicating a single powerful message. You've made a mistake, and you will learn from it. He did not raise his voice, did not shout, and did not move aggressively. Yet his presence alone was enough to command attention. The cabin seemed to collectively exhale, fully aware that they were watching a master at work. Around the cabin, murmurs continued to spread as people started connecting the dots. Some whispered to each other, "This is the Steven Seagal." The actor, martial artist, and legend. Phones captured every second of the interaction, documenting not just the confrontation, but the remarkable calmness with which Seagal handled it. Meanwhile, the arrogant passenger's bravado had vanished completely. His face had turned pale, and his body language betrayed regret and fear. He began muttering apologies, realizing the severity of his actions. Some passengers offered quiet words of warning. Others simply shook their heads in disbelief. The crowd's energy had shifted entirely. What was initially a tense confrontation was now a spectacle of humility and authority. Seagal's voice finally cut through the murmurs, calm and measured. Violence will never solve anything. Respect is earned, and arrogance will always meet consequences. His words resonated not just with the passenger, but with everyone in the cabin. The lesson was clear: disrespecting others, no matter how small the action may seem, can have immediate consequences. Do you think the passenger learned his lesson? Type yes or no in the comments, and share your thoughts. Passengers began to whisper among themselves, some nodding in agreement, others exchanging wide-eyed glances. The incident had shifted the mood of the entire cabin. Cameras were still rolling, capturing not just the confrontation, but the quiet, controlled authority of a man who knew exactly how to handle a dangerous situation without escalating it further. Even though the arrogant passenger had realized his mistake, Seagal remained vigilant. Every slight movement, every change in the cabin was observed and assessed. His focus never wavered. The crowd had become witnesses to a rare demonstration of patience, control, and respect, a real-life lesson in how power should be exercised responsibly. By now, the story was already beginning to spread beyond the cabin. Phones would soon make it viral, but in that moment, everyone present understood one thing clearly: arrogance can crumble in front of discipline and calm authority, and true power, Seagal had shown, is not about striking first, but knowing when, how, and why to act. The cabin was tense, but the shift in energy was undeniable. The arrogant passenger, who had struck Steven Seagal's wife just moments ago, was now acutely aware that he had miscalculated completely. His posture was slumped, his confidence shattered. For the first time, he realized he was facing someone whose calm control far outweighed any reckless aggression he could muster. Every eye in the cabin was on them, every phone camera recording the encounter for posterity. Seagal remained seated beside his wife, his presence unshakable. He did not raise his voice unnecessarily, nor did he make sudden movements. Instead, he relied on his years of discipline and training to assert authority. His eyes, calm yet penetrating, locked onto the passenger. There was no threat in them, only a silent, commanding expectation. The arrogant passenger stammered, attempting to justify his actions. Words of aggression and entitlement fell flat in the cabin, where the audience now fully understood the gravity of the situation. Seagal's mere presence rendered the excuses meaningless. His calmness was not passive, it was active authority, a lesson in power exercised without chaos. Seagal finally spoke, his voice low, steady, and impossible to ignore. Violence is not strength. Arrogance without respect is weakness. You have crossed a line, and now you will understand the consequences of your actions. The cabin fell completely silent. Passengers leaned forward in their seats, some holding their phones tighter, others simply holding their breath. Seagal's words were more than a warning. They were a universal lesson. Every passenger felt the weight of the message. Strength comes from control, humility, and protecting those who cannot defend themselves. If you believe respect is more powerful than aggression, type respect in the comments below. The arrogant passenger's face flushed with embarrassment. He realized that he had not only made a personal mistake but had humiliated himself in front of an entire plane of witnesses. His previous bravado was gone, replaced with fear and regret. A few passengers whispered words of caution, while others shook their heads, stunned at the transformation from aggressor to humbled observer. Seagal stood slowly, his movements deliberate, projecting authority and composure. He ensured his wife was safe, then turned slightly toward the arrogant passenger. The message was clear, accountability was expected, and justice did not require unnecessary force. It required control and intelligence. Around the cabin, murmurs of admiration spread. Passengers were amazed at the balance of restraint and power. Some were silently taking notes, understanding that this was a rare opportunity to witness a master-handle conflict without escalating violence. Cameras captured every movement, every glance, every subtle signal of dominance that Seagal exuded effortlessly. The arrogant passenger attempted a weak apology, but it was clear to everyone that words alone could not undo his mistake. Seagal's calm authority had already delivered the lesson. The surrounding passengers were now aligned with Seagal, their respect for him growing by the second. He had transformed what could have been chaos into an education in discipline and humility. Seagal addressed the cabin once more, his voice carrying a quiet but firm authority. Remember this: respect is not optional. Arrogance has a way of backfiring. Often when you least expect it, protect those around you, and always act with integrity. Even the flight attendants, who had been tense at first, relaxed, recognizing that the situation was fully under control. The arrogant passenger now stood as a cautionary tale in front of a live audience, humbled and subdued, a living lesson of impulsive behavior meeting disciplined authority. By the time the cabin settled, it was clear the encounter was no longer about the punch, the anger, or the initial aggression. It had become a story of respect, control, and courage. Every passenger knew they had witnessed something remarkable, a real-life demonstration of how composure, intelligence, and authority can neutralize aggression in a way that brute force never could. Have you ever witnessed someone being humbled instantly? Share your story in the comments below and let us know how you handled it. As phones kept recording, the story of Steven Seagal's calm, commanding response was already beginning to spread. What began as an act of arrogance had become a lesson for everyone aboard the flight, and soon for the entire world. The cabin was quiet, yet charged with anticipation. The arrogant passenger, who had caused chaos just moments ago, now sat frozen in disbelief. The lesson from Steven Seagal's calm authority had already sunk in, but there was one more revelation coming that would make the entire situation unforgettable. Some passengers, finally putting the pieces together, whispered to each other, "That's Steven Seagal, the martial artist, actor, legend." Others quietly nudged their neighbors, pointing discreetly, "He handled that so calmly." That was incredible. Phones continued rolling, capturing the extraordinary scene. Within seconds, it was clear that the arrogant passenger had underestimated not only the man's physical skill but the sheer presence and discipline of someone who had mastered conflict over decades. Seagal's calmness had disarmed the situation in a way that no one else could. The cabin had become a stage, and every passenger a witness to the power of composure. The arrogant man's ego had crumbled completely, replaced with shame, fear, and regret. He now fully understood the gravity of what he had done. His previous posturing and threats looked ridiculous in the face of Seagal's unwavering presence. Do you think the passenger realized the full extent of his mistake? Comment yes or no below. At that moment, a flight attendant quietly approached, signaling that additional authority figures were aware of the incident. Another passenger spoke up softly, ensuring that the man beside Seagal knew who he was dealing with. The arrogant passenger's eyes widened in shock. The reality of the situation hit him like a punch. This was not just any man. This was a global icon, a master of martial arts, and someone who could have escalated the encounter at will. The cabin, previously tense and anxious, now erupted in quiet awe. Murmurs of admiration and astonishment spread from seat to seat. "I can't believe he stayed so calm. That's Steven Seagal." Passengers who had initially feared escalation were now recording the aftermath, capturing the proud, composed presence of a man who had handled the situation with perfect precision. Seagal ensured that his wife remained safe, her hand resting lightly on his arm, showing mutual trust and confidence. He never gloated, never made the arrogant passenger feel small beyond what was necessary. Instead, his actions and words became a lesson in discipline and integrity. Respect is earned, not demanded, his calm demeanor seemed to say. Have you ever seen someone's arrogance completely backfire? Share your story in the comments below. The arrogant passenger, now pale and subdued, avoided eye contact with anyone. He muttered apologies, but it was clear that words could not undo the humiliation and lesson he had just received. Every movement he made now showed caution, awareness, and hesitation. The power dynamic had completely shifted. Around the cabin, the reactions of passengers varied. Some applauded quietly, some shook their heads in disbelief, while others simply stared, silently processing what they had witnessed. Every phone continued recording, ensuring that the story would spread far beyond the confines of the airplane. The incident had turned from a shocking act of aggression into a global lesson in humility, respect, and discipline. Seagal's final words, delivered calmly but firmly, resonated through the cabin. Arrogance will always meet consequences. Respect those around you, and never let ego guide your actions. The simplicity of the message amplified its power, leaving an indelible impression on everyone present. The incident was now fully viral in its immediate context. The cabin had recorded every second, and passengers began posting clips to social media, tagging locations and sharing awe-struck reactions. The arrogant passenger had learned his lesson in the most public way possible, while Seagal's message about calm authority and respect reached thousands of viewers within minutes. By the end of the flight, it was clear, what could have been a violent confrontation had instead become an unforgettable lesson for everyone on board. The world had witnessed how composure, patience, and mastery could turn a chaotic moment into a powerful story of humility and integrity. If you believe respect and composure are stronger than aggression, type respect in the comments below and share this story. By the time the flight landed, the story had already begun to spread. Passengers who had recorded the incident were sharing clips online, posting short videos and reactions to social media. Within hours, the world began watching. A reckless passenger had struck Steven Seagal's wife, only to be met with calm authority, discipline, and an unforgettable lesson in humility. The arrogant passenger, who had caused the chaos, now faced not only embarrassment in front of the cabin, but also the wider scrutiny of the online world. The videos captured every moment: his impulsive aggression, Seagal's composed response, and the final realization of his mistake. Millions would soon witness the consequences of arrogance meeting experience, and his brief moment of ego would serve as a cautionary tale across the internet. Seagal, however, did not gloat. He remained humble, emphasizing the real lesson of the event: respect, composure, and integrity matter more than aggression or entitlement. His calm demeanor and precise actions had not only protected his wife, but also provided an example to everyone watching. True strength, he demonstrated, comes from control, not recklessness. If you believe that composure and respect are the real signs of strength, type respect in the comments below. The flight attendants and fellow passengers who had witnessed the event firsthand praised Seagal for his professionalism and restraint. Social media buzzed with admiration. Viewers marveled at how Seagal had diffused a potentially violent situation without escalating it. Clips went viral, with millions of views and comments pouring in from around the world, from cities in the United States, Europe, Asia, and beyond. The story had become a global lesson in accountability and humility. News outlets and online channels picked up the story, highlighting how Seagal had turned an aggressive attack into a demonstration of discipline and wisdom. The arrogant passenger faced consequences not only socially, but also legally in some cases, depending on the airline's protocols. Meanwhile, Seagal's message about calm authority, protecting loved ones, and handling conflict with composure resonated worldwide. Even days later, the videos continued to circulate. People discussed the incident in forums, social media posts, and comment sections. The story inspired countless viewers to reflect on their own behavior, to consider how they handle conflict, and to recognize the power of patience, humility, and controlled strength. Seagal had shown that you don't need to react violently to command respect. You need presence, wisdom, and integrity. The arrogant passenger's regret became a reminder to everyone watching. Impulsive aggression can backfire in the most public and humbling ways. The incident on the plane was no longer just an altercation. It had become a viral lesson in humility, discipline, and personal responsibility. If you believe no one should underestimate the power of calm, discipline, and respect, type respect in the comments below. Share this story to inspire others, and subscribe for more legendary moments like this. As the world continued to watch, Steven Seagal had once again shown why he was not just a legendary martial artist and actor, but also a master of presence, control, and real-life wisdom. The moment was immortalized online. A story of arrogance humbled and composure rewarded. A lesson for anyone, anywhere, who believes strength comes from aggression.